Good morning, ladies. I got to warn you that what I'm going to say on climate and trade is not really encouraging, but the encouraging thing is we do have an immediate opportunity to make a change because all of our nations are about to submit their national contribution to climate change that Julie just mentioned, and it's still time to actually affect those and ensure they are ambitious enough to stay under 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in temperature, which is the only safe temperature rise to our system. So, having said that, let me go into the technicalities. And let me first say thank you to Irene, and also that it's such a pleasure to be among my tribe. I think each one of us every day transform the microaggression that we get into the force to make the change in the world that is needed. So thank you for being my tribe.
Chantal, can I just hold? Would we be able to change the slides, please?
So under the Paris Agreement, countries agreed to submit their planned national contribution to reduce greenhouse gases. Those are called NDCs, nationally determined contributions. And so we don't want to go into technicalities, but when you hear that word, it means this is the plan your country is preparing and submitting to the UN Climate Change Office. The first assessment of those plans was done in 2023 at the COP. And basically what was found is that the aggregation of all those plans would lead to a 2.6 degree increase in temperature. That's almost twice as much as the 1.5 degree that we should aim for. So, and yet the cost of inaction is much larger than the cost of action. And let me give you just a few examples. Already disruption to food system, water scarcity, heat stress, flood, and the spread of infectious disease are common and leading to mass mortality, large-scale displacement, and conflict. It is predicted that the GDP could reduce by 50% between 2070 and 2090 because of the non-linear impact of these climate change by the end of the century, if we don't act now. Heat exposure is already estimated to reduce labor productivity and to reduce total working hour worldwide by 2%. Cost of shipping is already increasing because we have to change maritime routes. And the insurance costs are spiking. In the US alone, average insurance premium from 2020 to 2023 increased by 33%. Mostly because of climate change impact. Countries are thus urged to boost their plan to reduce their national greenhouse contribution in this third contribution due in September ahead of the COP in Belém, Brazil, and cooperating internationally to effect this transition away from fossil fuel, triple renewable energy capacity, and double energy efficiency by 2030. That's in 5 years. And despite the US leaving the Paris Agreement, and this is something that we were all worried about, the Secretary General of the UN has been working with the 35 largest contributors, emitters, including, of course, the US, China, the EU, India, and others. And already, the good news is the EU and China have both committed to ambitious economy-wide plan to reduce greenhouse emission that would allows us to see within 1.5 degrees. Why is these 35 countries or jurisdiction important? Because they represent together 65% of the emission. So if these plans are ambitious, they can offer huge business opportunities in renewable, sustainable agriculture, low carbon technologies, ocean economy, tourism, and supported by carbon markets. But capturing these business opportunities and attracting investment require concerted action among policymakers across sectors at different scale of government, but also, as Julie mentioned, with all the stakeholders at the table, including private sector, but also small, medium enterprises that represent the majority of the business in the world, especially in developing countries. And the design of regulation and measure that will support those national plans need to be done with those at the table. And that's why I invite all of you, this is my call to action today, get involved in the national plan, call your decision makers, make sure who is in charge of those plans, and get involved in them. It's still time, because now they've done the assessment, now they're developing the policies and the plan. And just to give you, and also those will have to be supported by well-orchestrated trade, financial, and investment strategies. The BRIC countries, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, so the largest emerging economy, have already recognized the business values of these changes and have crafted a joint climate finance framework to capture these opportunities, and they'll be adopting it next week at their head of state level. But the Paris Agreement also required taking into account the historical contribution of climate change, the greenhouse gas emission, and the respective capacity of countries to respond to them. To give you just one number, Africa has 14% of the population. They only contribute 2% to greenhouse gases. And yes, they're the most affected by climate change because they're dependent on rain-fed agriculture and other sectors that depend on climate change. Therefore, these continents and these countries will need the support of our countries, the developed countries, not by charities, because we created the problem, and they need to develop just like we do. And if there's no peace there won't be peace anywhere. And I think that's something that we need to make sure our co-citizens understand. We also need to ensure that the cost of capital for developing countries is reduced. The international financial system right now, it's such that the cost of borrowing for African business and government is twice as much as Germany. So how are they supposed to compete and be able to invest into the transition to low-carbon economy when they can't have access to affordable capital? So we need to address these issues. And there's actually a Financing for Development conference just concluded in Sevilla right now, where some plans have been made to help in that direction. And these business opportunities, of course, as you all business people, you understand, need predictability in the trade system, because how do you invest if you don't know what the future is going to be like? And there's a lot of trade unpredictability, and actually it's evaporating by the day, because the WTO that has been providing pretty much those rules and helping the small economies and developing economy to kind of a certainty about what the rules and the tariff will be are evaporating. And they're evaporating for two reasons. One is, as we increase our ambition for climate, many of them are increasingly trade-related and have an impact on trade. And second, there's the US tariff. So let me quickly go through those. So climate-related trade measures reported to the WTO by countries have doubled since 2009. More than 2,000 non-tariff measures, these are the regulatory standards and all those things that you have to face every day, are in place to support domestic and international climate change mitigation, which regulate 26% already of trade, or world trade. And this will only increase. So, and thankfully, the EU, let me take it back. And now that the EU is increasing its ambition, it's reducing under its trading system the allowance, the free allowance it was giving to its business. And under that system, what they're doing is introducing a border carbon adjustment that basically to help alleviate the fear that their company, since they can't compete with the other one that face a lower carbon price in a third country, may displace their industry to that country and then import back those goods into the EU. And therefore, they're saying, let's put a carbon price at the border for our importers that they would charge the exporters, so that basically we can even the playing field between the exporters of these countries and the EU producers. The problem with that is it's a good idea, because if you want a level playing field, but there's various ways to do it. And I think, Julie, you mentioned the fragmentation. The EU has its own process. I've talked about the 2,000 non-tariff measures. The UK is now talking about a border carbon adjustment. Several other countries are talking about putting them in place, including the US, and each one of them using different measure for embodied carbon, different measure for monitoring and reporting, and the compliance cost of those, especially for micro, small enterprise like you, is outrageous. It's impossible, and basically already putting some of them out of business. So yes, we want to prevent this leakage of carbon to the low carbon pricing jurisdiction, but at the same time, we want to make sure we bring with us those small, medium enterprises so they can decarbonize their economy, because we're all on the same planet. It's the same carbons, the same atmosphere. So we need to help them to do that, and we have an obligation under the Paris Agreement to do so. And the African and least developed countries, 46 of them, basically that contribute almost nothing to climate change, in their national plan are putting in there what are the technology, what are the investment that they need from us to help them to do this transition. So on the positive side, these measures basically can help reduce global greenhouse emission, promote dissemination of green technologies in low carbon value chain that generate revenue, and then incentivize other jurisdictions to put carbon prices. Already several countries, including Brazil, have put in place these carbon pricing, so this is a good news. In addition, however, the carbon fee is one expense, and then the measurement, the monitoring, review, verification, reporting cost of exporting these are now increasing global trade tension and trigger retaliation, which is just making the trade system even more uncertain. The sheer amount of these policies have trade impact and increase in addition to increasing compliance costs, basically is alternating the trade flows in the economy at the disadvantage of developing countries, and many of you are from developing countries, because of higher embodied carbon in product, because except for some exceptions such as Brazil and Paraguay that have very green grid, if you didn't have access to those technologies to decarbonize your system, then you have higher carbon in your product, and when they get exported, they face a higher tariff. So, but this just means we need to work together to actually reduce the costs. And probably instead of having a one country by country developing their own monitoring, review, and verification system, we should all collaborate to create one and then adapt to local conditions, but at least to have a common principle. Now, the second uncertainty, of course, comes from U.S. tariff. The U.S. has announced a 10% universal tariff across the board from most countries, and then a 11 to 50% tariff on approximately 60 nations. That was put temporarily on hold until 8th of July, but as of yesterday, Vietnam has agreed of a 20% tariff, and we will see where these will go. So we predict at UNCTAD that this uncertainty could reduce global GDP growth by up to 1.5% and cause trade fluctuation of up to 10%. As I mentioned, these are they are the political choices that we can impact. And I will conclude by saying that make sure you politician and compatriot understand that investing in the SDGs and climate in these countries build more than school, hospital, and energy access. It builds trust, prosperity, and hope for the future, which mean more peace and less refugees. Thank you.